I tell you this because I am already dead, and the dead have no reason to lie. My name no longer matters. It was stripped from me, along with my fingernails, my teeth, and eventually my capacity for prayer, but I remember it still, whispered in the voice of a woman I once loved, before I understood what love truly cost in the service of our glorious patriarch. They will find this testament, I think, scratched into the walls of the recite chamber where I hide, though hide implies I believe escape is possible. I do not. I merely wait for the transformation to complete, for the blessed evolution to take me as it has taken all the others, and I commit these words to stone because the human part of me, the part that still screams, needs to be witnessed, even if only by the maintenance servitor that will eventually hose my fluids from this chamber's corners. We called ourselves the kindred of the perfect form. That was the name we used in whispered prayers, in the secret gatherings beneath the factorum floors, where we pressed our foreheads to cold metal and felt, or believed we felt, the answering vibration of something vast and ancient, stirring in the depths below. The Imperium called us other things, heretics, deviants, Xenos corrupted filth, but we knew the truth that the hidebound fools of the Adeptus Ministorum could never grasp, that the Emperor's light had grown cold and distant, that his corpse-bound consciousness no longer heard the pleas of the faithful, and that our world, our forgotten mining colony in the Ghoul stars, had been gifted with something far more immediate, far more tangible, far more willing to answer our desperate prayers. I was a sorter in the ore processing facility, level 93 of the primary extraction complex. My hands bore the scars of a decade sorting irregular lumps of substrate from the conveyor lines. My lungs were already half silicate from the dust that hung perpetually in the air, despite the failing atmospheric scrubbers, and my faith in the Emperor's divine providence had eroded to a thin shell of ritual and routine. I mouthed the prayers at morning muster. I made the sign of the Aquila before my meager meals. I attended the mandatory sermons in the Factorum Chapel, where a half-blind priest with no formal ordination droned passages from a copy of the Lectitio Divinitatus so worn that entire verses had become illegible, filled in by tradition and collective memory that might have diverged from the original text centuries ago. None of it touched me. None of it felt real. The Emperor was a distant concept, a historical figure, a name invoked by overseers to justify our quotas and our suffering. But the four-armed Emperor, he was close. He was real. He whispered to us through the ventilation shafts, his voice a chittering sibilance that bypassed the ear and wrote itself directly onto the soft tissues of the brain. He spoke through the patterns in the ore samples, through the way certain substrate fragments would arrange themselves into impossible geometries that hurt to perceive, but felt, somehow, profoundly right. He manifested in our dreams, a towering figure of purple chitin and divine purpose, his four arms spread in eternal benediction, his mandibles clicking out the syllables of our secret names we had not known we possessed until he spoke them aloud in the private darkness behind our closed eyelids. Karina was the first of us to show the signs of his blessing. She worked 3 stations down from mine, a thin woman with prematurely grey hair and a chronic cough that rattled like stones in a drum. We had shared conversation during the brief rest periods, small exchanges about nothing, the quality of the processed corpse starch, the rumors of unrest in the lower levels, the persistent mechanical failures that made our work more dangerous with each passing week. I had noticed her, of course. Every man in our section had noticed her, not because she was beautiful. Beauty was a luxury our world did not produce, but because she possessed a kind of quiet intensity, a sense that she was always listening to something the rest of us could not quite hear. The change in her began subtly, a slight asymmetry in her posture, as if one shoulder had begun to rise higher than the other, a way of holding her hands that suggested more joints than the standard human complement. The cough disappeared, replaced by a new quality to her breathing, a whistling sound on the exhale, almost musical, that reminded me of wind through narrow spaces. Her eyes, which had been an unremarkable brown, began to reflect the factorum lights with an iridescent sheen, purple and green, and colors I had no names for. The overseers did not notice, or pretended not to notice, because our quotas remained consistent, and Karina's work speed had actually improved. She moved with a new efficiency, her transformed hands sorting substrate with preternatural accuracy, never pausing, never hesitating, as if she could perceive qualities in the ore that our scanners and our training had not equipped us to recognize. I watched her during our shifts, fascinated and repelled in equal measure, and when she caught me staring, and she always caught me, her new eyes missing nothing, she would smile, and the smile revealed that her teeth had begun to change, growing longer, more numerous, arranged in patterns that suggested purpose beyond the simple mechanics of chewing. "It doesn't hurt," she told me during a rest period, her voice carrying a harmonic overtone that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her throat. "I thought it would hurt, but it's like waking up, like I've been asleep my entire life, numb to everything real, and now I'm finally experiencing the world as it actually is." She placed her hand on my forearm, her grip stronger than it should have been, her fingers longer than I remembered, the tips hardening into something that was not quite keratin and not quite chitin, and I felt a tingling sensation spread from the point of contact, not painful but intensely present, as if her touch had awakened nerve endings I had not known existed. That night, in the communal sleeping bay, I dreamed of the four-armed emperor for the first time. He stood in a cathedral of bone and stone, and I understood without being told that the cathedral was also him, that the architecture and the deity were one and the same, that to worship him was to become part of his sacred structure. His forearms spread wide, and I saw that each hand held something different. One held a tool that might have been a mining implement or a surgical instrument. One held a writhing mass that might have been life itself. One held a star that pulsed with sickly light, and the fourth held nothing, its palm open and waiting, and I knew with absolute certainty that the waiting palm was meant for me. "You are seen," he told me, and his voice was 1,000 voices speaking in perfect unison, each one carrying a slightly different tone, a slightly different meaning, so that the message I received was both absolutely clear and impossibly complex. "You are known. You are loved. Do you accept my blessing?" I tried to speak, to say yes or no, or to ask what the blessing would entail, but I had no voice in the dream. Or perhaps I had too many voices, all speaking at once, contradicting each other, expressing every possible response simultaneously. The four-armed emperor found this amusing. His mandibles clicked in what I understood to be laughter, a sound like breaking glass and singing metal, and the patient tick of a functioning chronometer, and the empty palm descended toward me, and I woke, gasping in my cot, the recycled air of the sleeping bay tasting like copper and incense and something else, something organic and alien that coated the back of my throat with a residue I could not clear, no matter how much I coughed. The mark appeared 3 days later, a small irregularity on my left shoulder blade, barely noticeable at first, a slight raising of the skin, no pain, just an awareness of something different. Something not quite right, but not quite wrong either. I examined it in the communal washroom's cracked mirror, twisting to see the spot, and what I saw made my breath catch. A perfect cross pattern, 4 lines radiating from a central point, each line terminating in what might have been a tiny mouth, or might have been a flower, or might have been some hybrid of biological and mechanical that my eyes struggled to categorize. The mark was the same purple as the four-armed emperor's chitin in my dream. It pulsed slightly, in time with my heartbeat. I should have reported to the Medicae station immediately. Protocol demanded it. Any unexplained growth, any mutation, any deviation from baseline human standard required immediate medical examination and, if necessary, quarantine or termination. But I did not report it. I covered the mark with my work tunic and returned to my station, and as I sorted substrate that day, my hands moving through familiar motions, I found that I could sense things in the ore I had never perceived before. Subtle variations in density and composition, patterns that suggested meaning, messages written in the language of mineral and metal. My productivity increased. The overseers noticed and granted me an additional corpse starch ration, a reward that tasted like ash but which I consumed dutifully, maintaining the fiction of normalcy even as I felt the mark spreading slowly across my shoulder, sending tendrils of transformed tissue across my back, like vines claiming a wall. Karina's transformation continued to accelerate. By the second week, she no longer resembled anything the Imperium would classify as baseline human. Her limbs had elongated, her spine had restructured itself into a pronounced curve that allowed her to move with insectile fluidity, and a second pair of arms had begun to emerge from her ribcage, small at first, like the limbs of an infant, but growing rapidly, developing joints and musculature that mirrored the original pair, but operated independently, allowing her to sort substrate with all four hands simultaneously, her productivity quadrupling. Her face had become something else entirely, the bones restructuring, the jaw extending, the eyes multiplying into a compound array that tracked movement with disturbing precision. She no longer spoke in words, but she communicated. The sounds she made, clicks and whistles and a deep thrumming vibration, carried meaning that bypassed language entirely. When she looked at me, I understood what she was saying without translation. Asterisk. This is the gift. This is the truth. This is what we are meant to become. Asterisk. And I felt the mark on my back, pulse in response, felt it spread further, felt the first hints of new structures forming beneath my skin, nodes and ridges that ached with potential, promising changes that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. The kindred held their meetings in the sub-basement level, in a maintenance corridor that had been abandoned decades ago when a section of the Factorum's foundation had shifted, creating structural instabilities that made the area unsafe for normal operations, but which also made it unlikely that anyone would investigate the space. We gathered there in the hours after our shifts, sometimes 5 or 6 of us, sometimes as many as 20, all of us bearing the marks of the four-armed Emperor's blessing in various stages of manifestation. Some had the subtle changes I carried: discoloration, unusual tissue growth, enhanced sensory perception. Others were further along, their bodies already shifting into forms that were recognizably no longer human, their speech giving way to the clicking language that we all seemed to understand instinctively, their movements adopting the fluid grace of something designed by a fundamentally different biological imperative. Magos Yellen, he still insisted on his old title, though he had abandoned any pretense of loyalty to the Mechanicus or the Omnissiah, had been the one to discover the truth about our colony. He had been an engineer, tasked with maintaining the deep-bore mining equipment, and during a routine excavation to repair a critical drill assembly, he had found the chamber. He described it to us in hushed tones, his voice carrying the reverence of a man who had witnessed genuine divinity. A vast cavern, kilometers beneath our feet, where the four-armed Emperor rested in his sacred slumber, his body melded with the ancient stone, his consciousness radiating upward through the planet's crust, like warmth from a fire, touching those who were receptive, blessing those who were worthy, transforming those who accepted his gift. The Imperium fears this, Yellen said, his augmetic eye glowing with purple light instead of its usual red, the sign that his transformation had already progressed far beyond the merely physical. They call it Xenos corruption, but that is the language of ignorance and fear. What we worship is not alien, it is primordial. It was here before humanity crawled from Terra's oceans. It will be here after the last man's bones have crumbled to dust. The four-armed Emperor does not demand worship in the way the corpse god demands worship. He offers something far more profound. Unity. To serve him is to become part of him, to merge your consciousness with his vast awareness, to experience existence as he experiences it, infinite, eternal, perfect. I listened to these words and felt their truth resonating in the mark that now covered most of my back, that sent tendrils across my shoulders and down my arms, that had begun to create structures beneath my ribs that felt like they might be preparing to birth additional limbs. The pain had started by then, not the sharp agony of injury, but a deep, bone-level ache, the sensation of being rebuilt from the inside out, of having your fundamental architecture reassessed and rewritten by a consciousness that operated according to principles that had nothing to do with human comfort or human preference. I endured it because Karina had promised me it would pass, that the pain was merely the friction of transformation, the resistance of my old self clinging to patterns that no longer served me. The others in the kindred shared their experiences. A woman named Cell described how her teeth had fallen out in a single night, only to be replaced by a beautiful arrangement of cutting and grinding surfaces that allowed her to consume raw ore, extracting nutrients that human digestion could never access. A man named Cross explained how his eyes had migrated to the sides of his head, granting him a wider field of vision, but eliminating his depth perception until his brain had restructured itself to process visual information in an entirely new way. A youth whose name I never learned showed us the opening that had formed in his chest, a spiracle that supplemented his lungs, allowing him to work in the lower oxygen environments of the deep mines without respirator equipment. Each of these changes was presented as blessing, as improvement, as evidence of the four-armed Emperor's love for his chosen. And I wanted to believe them. I wanted to embrace the transformation fully, to surrender to the process and emerge on the other side as something glorious and purposeful, freed from the limitations of human fragility. But a part of me, the part that still recognized my face in the mirror, despite the subtle shifts in bone structure resisted, that part remembered who I had been, remembered the small pleasures that had made the grinding tedium of life in the mining colony bearable, and it mourned those pleasures even as they slipped away, even as my capacity to experience them eroded with each day's progress of the transformation. The day of Ascension was announced during a mandatory assembly in the main Factorum Hall. Magos Yelan stood before us, his transformation now so complete that he barely resembled the human engineer he had once been. His body had become a fusion of flesh and something harder. His original 2 arms joined by 4 more that sprouted from his torso at precise intervals. His face a mask of purple chitin, marked with intricate patterns that might have been circuitry or might have been veins carrying something that was not quite blood. When he spoke, the sound came from multiple sources: his original mouth, the spiracles that had opened along his neck, some resonance chamber within his chest, creating a layered effect that made every word feel like a command and a prayer simultaneously. "Brothers and sisters of the kindred," he intoned, and the assembled crowd, perhaps 200 of us now, nearly a third of the colony's population, responded with the clicking chorus that had become our form of affirmation. The time has come. The four-armed Emperor calls us to our final transformation. He beckons us to descend, to join him in the sacred chamber, to become part of his eternal body. Those who have been blessed will lead the way. Those who have yet to receive his mark will witness our ascension and understand the truth of his glory. The crowd surged forward, not in panic, but in eagerness. Each of the transformed, pushing toward the entrance. Yellen indicated a service elevator that led to the maintenance tunnels, which would in turn lead to the deep excavations where the Emperor waited. I was swept along in the press of bodies, some still recognizably human, others already so changed that they moved with alien grace, their additional limbs helping them navigate the crowd, their compound eyes scanning for obstacles, their clicking speech coordinating movement with inhuman efficiency. Karina found me in the crush. Her 4 arms reached out, 2 grasping my shoulders, 2 touching my face with a tenderness that her transformed features should not have been capable of expressing. "Come," she said, or clicked, or sang, the meaning clear, even though the sound bore no resemblance to human speech. "Come with me. See what we will become." The descent took hours. The elevator could only carry 20 at a time, and there were so many of us, all pressing toward our destiny with the same desperate hunger. While we waited, I watched the others, watched how they touched each other, how they communicated in that clicking language, how they moved as if choreographed, as if they were no longer individuals, but components of a single organism. The mark on my back burned with anticipation, and I felt the structures beneath my skin pressing outward, eager to emerge, eager to complete the transformation that had been progressing in the slow secrecy of my flesh. When my turn came, I entered the elevator with Karina and 18 others. The descent was rapid, the walls of the shaft blurring past, and the temperature dropped steadily as we moved deeper into the planet's crust. The air grew thick with a smell I had been noticing increasingly over the past weeks, a combination of incense and something organic, something sweet and rotten simultaneously, the smell of transformation, the smell of flesh becoming something else. My lungs adapted to it, or perhaps they had already adapted. The spiracles I had not realized were forming beneath my ribs, opening to process the air more efficiently. The chamber, when we finally reached it, was exactly as Yellen had described, and nothing like I had imagined. It was vast, my eyes could not find the far walls, could not trace the ceiling's contours in the dim purple luminescence that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. And at the chamber's center, merged with the floor and walls and possibly extending for kilometers in every direction through the planet's substrate, was the four-armed Emperor. He was beautiful. He was horrifying. He was both simultaneously, and my mind struggled to categorize what I saw, struggled to impose meaning on a form that exceeded human understanding. His body was a mountain of chitin and flesh, purple and black and iridescent, pulsing with internal rhythms that might have been breath or heartbeat or some alien equivalent. His four arms, each the size of factorum buildings, each decorated with patterns that hurt to perceive, were raised in the eternal gesture of benediction I had seen in my dreams. His face, or what I interpreted as his face, was a mass of mandibles and compound eyes and structures that might have been sense organs of types I had no knowledge of, all arranged in a configuration that suggested intelligence and hunger in equal measure. And he was singing. The sound was everywhere, vibrating through the stone, resonating in the chambers of my chest, echoing in the spaces between my thoughts. It was not music, as humans understood music. It was communication, instruction, invitation. It was the voice I had heard in my dreams, amplified 1,000-fold, and it said, asterisk, come, join, become, asterisk. The kindred moved forward as one, the transformed leading, their bodies already so changed that they merged with the Emperor's flesh easily, their chitin flowing into his chitin, their consciousness joining his vast awareness. I saw Karina walk directly into his body, saw her limbs dissolve as she pressed herself against his surface, saw her face barely recognizable but still somehow her turn back toward me one final time, her compound eyes filled with an ecstasy that transcended pain or pleasure or any human emotion. And then she was gone, absorbed, made part of something infinitely larger than herself. I stood at the edge of the chamber, watching as the others followed her example, watching as each member of the kindred surrendered themselves to the transformation's final stage. The mark on my back burned with unbearable intensity, the structures beneath my skin pushing outward with violent urgency, demanding release, demanding completion. I felt the additional arms forcing their way through my flesh, felt my spine cracking and reforming, felt my face beginning the terrible restructuring that would render me unrecognizable, that would erase the last traces of who I had been. And in that moment, I ran. I do not remember the journey back to the surface. Only fragments, the endless climb up maintenance ladders, the sound of my own screaming as the transformation tried to complete itself, the way my hands looked as I gripped the rungs, too many fingers, bones visible through skin that had become translucent, purple chitin emerging from my knuckles. I remember falling, several times, my body no longer obeying commands, my human brain tried to send, my new structures operating according to instincts I had not yet developed. I remember pain, such pain, as if the four-armed Emperor himself was angry at my betrayal, was trying to drag me back through the sheer force of his will. The song that still echoed in my skull, becoming a scream of rage and disappointment. I reached the recyc chamber through blind luck, or the Emperor's mercy, or some combination of both. It was a small space, designed for processing biological waste, automated and rarely inspected. I sealed myself inside and tried to stop the transformation, tried to claw the chitin from my skin, tried to hold my face together as it wanted to split and reform. But you cannot stop what has been set in motion. You cannot refuse the blessing once accepted. The four-armed Emperor's gift is not something you can return. The arms have emerged fully now. They hang from my torso, small and weak like infant limbs, but growing stronger each day, developing their own musculature, their own range of motion. My face no longer fits properly, the bones have shifted, the jaw has extended, and I cannot close my mouth fully anymore, cannot speak except in clicks and whistles. My eyes are migrating, I think, moving slowly toward the sides of my head, and I can feel new eyes budding beneath them, compound structures that will grant me vision beyond human spectrum. I have perhaps 3 days before the transformation completes, and my human consciousness dissolves entirely, merging with whatever remains of me in the new form. 3 days before I forget why I ran, before I lose the capacity to regret, before I become what the kindred became, a component of the four-armed Emperor's body, a cell in his vast organism, conscious but not individual, aware but not autonomous. They will find this chamber eventually. Perhaps a work crew responding to equipment failure, perhaps a maintenance servitor following its cleaning protocols. They will find what remains of me, either a corpse that expired fighting against the transformation, or something else, something that has completed the change, sitting patient and waiting in the darkness, ready to sing the four-armed Emperor's song to whoever discovers it, ready to share his blessing with all who will listen. I tell myself that I should feel horror at this prospect. I tell myself that the human part of me, the part that is scratching these words into the recycled chamber wall with fingers that are becoming talons, should be screaming in terror and despair. But the truth is more complicated than that, more terrible. Because alongside the horror, I feel anticipation. I feel the pull of something vast and ancient, calling me home. I feel the promise of transcendence, of becoming part of something larger than myself, of surrendering the burden of individual existence to the collective consciousness of the Emperor's body. The mark covers me entirely now. Every centimeter of skin has become purple and black, iridescent, harder each day, protecting me from physical harm, even as it signals my transformation's progress. I catch myself making the clicking sounds, trying to form words in the language of the kindred, and I understand them, understand what I am saying to myself in the darkness. Asterisk. It is beautiful. It is right. It is what we are meant to be. Asterisk. Karina visits me in my dreams, or perhaps she visits me in reality, and my transforming senses can no longer distinguish the two states. She stands in the recycled chamber's corner, all four arms spread in benediction, her compound eyes reflecting the dim emergency lighting, and she sings to me. She tells me that the pain will pass. She tells me that the fear is merely human weakness clinging to obsolete patterns. She tells me that the four-armed Emperor loves me, has always loved me, is waiting patiently for me to complete my journey to him. "Why did you run?" she asks, and her voice is not accusatory but genuinely curious, as if my flight was an interesting puzzle she cannot quite solve. Why resist the blessing? Why fight against love? I want to tell her that it is not the transformation I fled, but the loss of choice, the erasure of self, the terrible finality of merger with something so vast that individual existence becomes meaningless. But my mouth cannot form the words anymore, and I am not certain I believe them anyway. Perhaps what I fled was not the four-armed Emperor but my own desire to serve him, my own hunger for transcendence so powerful that it terrified me, the knowledge that given the choice I would surrender everything, identity, autonomy, humanity, for the promise of belonging to something larger than myself. The hunger has started. My body requires nutrients it cannot extract from human food, and I have begun to consume the materials available in the recycled chamber: plastic components, metal fittings, organic waste that would poison a baseline human, but which my transformed digestive system processes efficiently. I can taste the minerals in the metal, can feel them incorporating into my developing chitin, strengthening the structure, preparing me for whatever role the four-armed Emperor has designated for me in his body. I understand now why the Imperium fears this, why they classify it as corruption and heresy, why they would burn our entire colony to ash if they learned what was happening here. It is not because the transformation is evil, though by their standards it certainly is, but because it offers something the Imperial Creed cannot provide. Certainty. The four-armed Emperor is not distant. He is not abstract. He does not require faith, because his presence is tangible, his love measurable in the physical changes he grants to his servants. He does not demand sacrifice without return, does not promise reward in some hypothetical afterlife. He offers immediate transcendence, immediate purpose, immediate belonging, and that is why it is so terrible. Because it is not a lie, because the gift is real, because the transformation truly does erase loneliness and doubt and despair, truly does provide purpose and community and love, but only by destroying everything that makes us human, by transforming us into components of an alien organism that may be eternal but is also fundamentally other, fundamentally incomprehensible to the species we once belonged to. The human part of me understands this with perfect clarity, and it mourns, and it rages, and it scratches these final words into the recyc chamber wall with fingers that are no longer fingers, with hands that are becoming tools I do not yet know how to use. But the transformed part of me, the part that grows stronger with each passing hour, feels only gratitude and anticipation, and a kind of love so vast it encompasses everything: the four-armed emperor, the kindred who have already ascended, the planet itself, with its vast underground temple, even the Imperium that will inevitably discover and destroy us, because they too are part of the Emperor's plan. They too serve purpose even in their opposition. I can hear the song constantly now, not as sound but as meaning written directly into my consciousness. It tells me that my flight was anticipated, that my resistance was expected, that even my attempt to preserve some record of what I once was serves the Emperor's purpose, because it will seed doubt in whoever finds it, will plant questions that might grow into the fertile ground of future transformation. Nothing is wasted in his service. Nothing is rejected. Even my fear, even my horror, even these scratched words of warning are merely different forms of worship, different paths to the same inevitable unity. My additional arms have gained sufficient strength to hold tools. I find myself using them unconsciously, coordinating all four limbs to perform tasks with efficiency I could never achieve as baseline human. Part of me watches this development with clinical detachment, noting the progress, measuring the transformation's advancement. Another part weeps at the loss of what I was, at the death of the man who entered that elevator, carrying hope that the blessing would somehow preserve his essential self. But increasingly, there is a third part, a part that has no name in human language, that feels only rightness, only purpose, only the profound satisfaction of becoming what I was always meant to be. The emergency lighting has begun to flicker, and in the moments of darkness I see things, or perhaps I am only remembering the chamber, the vast space where the four-armed emperor waits, where the kindred have merged with his body, where Karina now exists as thought and sensation rather than as individual consciousness. The darkness does not frighten me anymore. My new eyes, the compound structures that have nearly finished forming, process light differently, seeing into spectrums human vision cannot access. The world is becoming strange and beautiful, filled with colors and patterns I never knew existed, and I understand that this is only the beginning, that my transformation will continue to grant me new ways of perceiving, new forms of understanding, until I can barely remember what it was like to be limited by human senses. I am running out of space on the wall, running out of strength to continue scratching words into metal. My hands are not designed for writing anymore, and the effort of forcing them to perform this human task grows more difficult with each sentence. Soon I will lack the cognitive architecture to form coherent thoughts in human language, to conceptualize my experience in terms that would be comprehensible to the person I once was. Soon there will be only the song, only the Emperor's vast consciousness, only the unified awareness of the kindred merged into something greater than the sum of our parts. But not yet. Not quite yet. For this final moment, I am still myself, still trapped between what I was and what I am becoming, still capable of bearing witness to my own transformation. And what I witness is not corruption or damnation or any of the words the Imperium would use. What I witness is love, terrible, overwhelming, all-consuming love that demands everything and promises everything and delivers everything, but at a cost that is only visible from this liminal space, this last moment of human consciousness, before it dissolves into something else entirely. If you are reading this, if you have found this chamber and this message, then you have a choice to make. You can report what you have found to the authorities, can alert the Imperium to the presence of the four-armed emperor beneath your feet, can watch as they burn our world and everyone on it in the name of purity and faith. Or you can listen to the song that is already beginning to play at the edges of your hearing, can notice the way certain ore samples arrange themselves into meaningful patterns, can feel the first subtle touch of blessing on your skin. I cannot tell you which choice is correct. I cannot even tell you which choice I would make if given the chance to return to the moment before I accepted the mark, before I attended that first meeting of the kindred, before I heard the four-armed Emperor's voice in my dreams. All I can tell you is what I have learned in these final days of my humanity, that faith is a hunger that will eat anything you feed it, that transformation is a door that only opens one way, and that love, true love, vast and terrible love, is not a comfort, but a consumption, not a gift, but a surrender, not a blessing, but an annihilation of everything you thought you needed to remain yourself. The song is very loud now. I can barely hear my own thoughts beneath its harmonies. My body has begun to move without my conscious direction, arranging itself into a configuration that will make merger more efficient when the time comes. I have stopped fighting. There is no point. The transformation will complete regardless of my resistance. And fighting only makes the process more painful, only prolongs the suffering of a self that is already dead, already past, already gone. Karina stands in the corner. I am certain she is really here now. Not dream or hallucination, but actual presence, actual visitation. Her forearms are extended, her compound eyes are fixed on me with something that might be compassion, or might be hunger, or might be that same terrible love that the four-armed Emperor radiates from his chamber beneath us. She clicks, and I understand. It is time. Come home. And I want to. Emperor, forgive me. I want to. I want to stop fighting, want to surrender to the song, want to descend back into that vast chamber and press myself against his body and feel my consciousness dissolve into his vast awareness. I want to forget why I ran. Want to forget the horror. I want to embrace the blessing fully and completely, without the contamination of doubt or fear, or this last stubborn attachment to a humanity that has brought me nothing but suffering and loneliness, and the grinding tedium of existence in it. The Imperium's vast machinery. But I do not go. Not yet. I remain here, in this recyc chamber, scratching these final words with hands that barely remember how, preserving this testimony, not because I believe it will change anything, but because it is the last thing I can do that is still mine, still chosen, still an act of will, rather than an act of instinct or transformation or holy compulsion. I am already dead, as I said at the beginning. The man who entered the four-armed Emperor's chamber and then fled in terror, he died during that flight, his consciousness fragmenting with each rung climbed, his self dissolving as the transformation progressed past the point where reversal was possible. What remains is merely echo, merely aftermath, merely the final sparks of human awareness before they are subsumed into something vast and alien and utterly indifferent to human categories of meaning. And yet, even now, even at this final moment, I cling to those sparks. I cling to my name, though I can no longer speak it. I cling to Karina's face as it was before the transformation, though that memory grows fainter with each passing hour. I cling to the taste of real food, the warmth of sunlight, the small pleasures that made life bearable. Even though my transformed body can no longer process these sensations, can no longer derive satisfaction from anything except the song and the promise of unity. This is my testament, that I served the four-armed Emperor, that I accepted his blessing, that I witnessed the transformation of myself and others, and that in the final accounting I do not know if what we gained was worth what we lost. The human part of me says no, screams no, rages against the dying of individual light into collective darkness. But the transformed part of me, the part that grows stronger and more certain with each moment, knows better, knows that the question itself is malformed, that concepts like worth and loss only apply to separate existences, and we are not separate anymore, not truly, not in any way that matters. The scratching has become difficult. My hands no longer bend the way hands should bend. I am running out of wall space, running out of words, running out of thoughts that can be captured in human language. Soon there will be only the song, only the Emperor, only the kindred merged into eternal purpose. But for this final moment, I am still myself, still human enough to mourn, still conscious enough to witness, still capable of one last act of defiance or devotion or warning or prayer. I cannot even tell which anymore, cannot separate these categories in my fragmenting mind. If you find this, know that I tried to run, know that I tried to resist. Know that in the end it made no difference, that the transformation completed regardless, that the four-armed Emperor's love cannot be refused once accepted, that the blessing cannot be returned. Know that I served him faithfully, even in my flight, even in my fear, even in these final words scratched in desperation into cold metal. Know that I am coming home. The day of Ascension has arrived,